The soft sound of footsteps echoed through the shiny marble floor of the Jade store as a woman walked in wearing a faded dress and holding a small brown handbag in her hands. Everyone inside the store turned to look at her, their eyes filled with surprise and quiet judgment. The woman's name was Lena, and though her clothes were plain, her eyes held warmth and kindness. She looked around the room full of beautiful jade stones, sparkling under bright lights. Everything inside the store looked expensive and perfect. The walls were made of glass and gold frames. The shelves were full of bracelets, necklaces, and rings shining like treasures from another world. Lena smiled softly and whispered to herself that her mother would love a jade bracelet for her birthday. She had saved money for many months just to buy something nice for her. As she walked closer to the counter, a tall sales lady with perfect makeup and high heels looked at her from head to toe. The sales lady's lips curved into a small smirk as she said in a sweet but cold voice, "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I help you?" Lena nodded politely and said, "I would like to see that green bracelet over there. The one in the glass case, please." The sales lady raised her eyebrows and asked, "Are you sure you want that one? It is very expensive." Lena nodded again, still smiling, and said, "Yes, I would like to see it." The sales lady sighed loudly enough for others to hear. She pressed a button to open the glass case, then carefully took out the bracelet and placed it on the counter. She said, "This piece is $10,000, ma'am. Do you still want to see it?" Her voice carried a hint of laughter, and the people around the store began to glance in their direction. A group of young women standing nearby whispered to each other. One of them giggled and said she must be joking. Look at her dress. She probably can't even afford a pair of earrings. Lena heard their laughter, but she did not say anything. She gently picked up the bracelet and held it against her wrist. The cool touch of the jade made her heart feel calm. She imagined her mother smiling, wearing it during her birthday dinner. But before she could say anything more, the sales lady leaned forward and said, "Ma'am, we usually do not allow people to touch the products if they are not serious buyers. Please be careful with it." Lena looked up, her eyes calm but firm, and replied, "I am serious. I plan to buy it today." The sales lady laughed softly, shaking her head and said, "Ma'am, this bracelet is real jade. It is not a cheap imitation. Perhaps you would prefer something in the corner section? Those are more affordable." The words hit Lena like a slap, but she stayed quiet. She placed the bracelet down gently and said, "Thank you, I just wanted to see it." At that moment, the manager of the store came out from the back room. He was a short man wearing a black suit and an expression full of pride. He asked the saleslady, "What is going on here?" The saleslady pointed at Lena and said she wants to buy the green bracelet, but I think she may have entered the wrong store. The manager looked at Lena and frowned. He said, "Miss, maybe you should visit one of our smaller branches. The items there are cheaper." Lena blinked. Slowly feeling the sting in her chest, she said softly, "Sir, I came here because I wanted something special for my mother I have saved for a long time. Please let me see what I can buy." But the manager only shook his head and waved his hand as if to dismiss her. He said, "We have very important clients arriving soon. Please do not disturb them." The customers nearby began to whisper louder. Some laughed while others shook their heads. One woman dressed in a red dress said out loud, "Oh, please, this is embarrassing." She should leave before she ruins the atmosphere. The sound of laughter filled the air and Lena's face grew pale. She clutched her handbag tightly, trying to hold back tears. She wanted to leave, but her heart would not let her. Something inside told her to stay. The saleslady crossed her arms and said, "Ma'am, if you cannot afford it, please do not waste our time. We have real customers to serve." Lena looked down at her hands for a long moment, then lifted her head and said calmly, "Can afford it, and I want to buy it." The saleslady raised her voice and said, "Really? Then show me your card or your cash." Everyone stopped talking for a second. All eyes were now on Lena reached into her small handbag and took out her phone. She looked straight at the saleslady and said, "I will call my husband. He will handle the payment." The room went silent for a moment, and then a man in the back laughed a little. He whispered to his friend, "Sure, her husband must be the richest man in the world, right?" The others chuckled again, but Lena didn't seem bothered. She stepped aside near the window and started dialing her phone. Her hands shook a little, but not from fear. From quiet anger. Outside the window, she could see the sunlight reflecting. Off the cars parked by the road, she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Everything will be fine." She knew her husband would come soon. She knew he would understand, and she knew everyone inside would regret how they treated her. But still, in that moment, standing in the middle of laughter and cold looks, she felt so small, so invisible. The sales lady turned to the manager and said, "This is ridiculous. Should we ask her to leave?" The manager shrugged and said, "Let her be. She will leave, on her own, when she realizes she cannot pay." Inside Lena's heart, a storm was growing, but on her face there was only silence. No one in the store knew who she really was. No one knew the truth about the woman they were mocking, and no one could imagine what was about to happen next. The sound of whispers filled the Jade store as Lena stood quietly by the window. Her phone pressed to her ear, but the call did not connect right away. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried again. Her reflection in the glass showed a tired yet gentle face, the face of a woman who had been patient for far too long behind her. Laughter rose again from the other customers. The saleslady was now talking to a couple dressed in designer clothes. Her voice suddenly warm and full of fake sweetness, as if nothing had happened. Lena turned back to the counter, her voice calm as she asked, "May I please see that bracelet again?" The saleslady froze for a second, then forced a smile and said, "I told you before, ma'am. This piece costs $10,000. It is not something everyone can buy." The woman beside her giggled and said, "Maybe she thinks it is on discount today." The group laughed louder this time, and the sound stung Lena's ears like sharp needles. But she still smiled and said kindly, "I only want to buy something beautiful for my mother. I do not mean to cause any trouble." The manager, who was standing nearby, crossed his arms and said, "Ma'am, I already told you we are busy. If you cannot buy, please do not touch anything." Lena looked straight at him, her voice steady. "I can buy it, sir. I just want a little respect." The manager smirked and said, "Respect is earned, not given to anyone who walks in from the street." A rich woman named Mrs. Wong, who had been standing near the Jade statues, joined the conversation. She wore diamonds on her neck, and her perfume filled the room. She looked at Lena from head to toe and said in a loud voice, "People like her should know their place. This is not a flea market. This is a luxury store." Her friends laughed again. One of them whispered, "Maybe she just wants to take a photo to pretend she is rich." Mrs. Wong laughed harder and said maybe she will post it online saying she owns it. The saleslady chuckled, along trying to impress the rich customer. Lena's heart ached, but she stood still, her hands holding the little brown bag tightly. She could feel her eyes burning, but she refused to cry in front of them. She thought of her mother and how proud she would be if she could bring home that jade bracelet. She took a slow breath and said softly to herself, "Stay calm. Everything will be fine." Just then the door opened again, and another group of customers entered. They were greeted with smiles and bows from the saleslady and manager, as if royalty had arrived. Lena stood aside quietly, watching how quickly people changed their faces, depending on who walked through the door. One moment, cruel; the next, polite and sweet. It made her chest tighten. She thought to herself, why do people judge so quickly without even knowing a person's story? The saleslady walked past her and said in a low voice, "Ma'am, please step aside. You are blocking the way." Lena moved away without saying a word. She stood near a shelf full of jade figurines, pretending to look at them. The manager glanced at her again and whispered to a guard by the door, "If she causes any trouble, show her out." The guard nodded with a small grin. Lena's phone buzzed. Finally, her husband's call connected. She whispered into it, her voice soft but full of emotion. "Dear, can you come to the Jade store near Central Plaza?" Something happened. There was a pause on the other end before a deep, calm voice replied, "I am on my way. Wait for me." Lena hung up the call and felt her heart steady again. She looked up at the ceiling lights, their glow reflecting off the jade pieces like small stars. She whispered quietly, "Everything will change. Soon." Meanwhile, Mrs. Wong noticed her whispering and smirked. She said loudly, "Oh, look, she is calling her rich husband. Maybe he is coming on his bicycle." Everyone in the room burst into laughter again. The saleslady covered her mouth to hide her smile. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, praying for patience. She reminded herself that dignity did not depend on wealth. She had learned that from her mother long ago. Time seemed to move slowly. The room buzzed with gossip and mockery, but Lena remained still like a calm sea before a storm. Her eyes focused. On the door, her heart whispering that soon justice would walk through it. The laughter of the crowd no longer reached her ears because she knew something they did not. She knew the truth about who she really was and who her husband really was. The manager came closer once more, his voice colder than before. "Ma'am, I think you should leave now. We do not want to create a scene." Lena turned to him and said quietly, "I am not leaving. My husband will be here soon. He will handle everything." The manager chuckled and said, "Oh, I am sure he will. Maybe he can pay us with good wishes." The other customers laughed again, filling the air with arrogance and cruelty. Lena lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted her chin higher than before. Her calmness made everyone more curious. Who was this woman? Why was she not angry? Why did she still stand there with so much confidence? Minutes passed and the sunlight outside began to fade, leaving golden shadows on the floor. Just as the laughter grew louder, the sound of a car engine stopped outside the glass doors. It was deep and powerful. Unlike the small cars parked nearby, the laughter slowly died as people turned toward the window, curious to see who it was. Lena's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. She whispered under her breath, "He is here." The doors of the Jade store opened slowly. A cool breeze entered the room, carrying the scent of luxury and strength. Footsteps echoed through the marble floor. Steady calm commanding the manager straightened. His suit, the saleslady, fixed her hair. Mrs. Wong adjusted her diamond necklace, but when the tall man in the black suit stepped inside, his eyes did not look at anyone except Lena. He walked straight toward her without hesitation. Everyone watched in silence and confusion. Who was this man and why did he look at her like she was the most precious thing in the world? The laughter that once filled the air was now replaced by quiet fear and growing curiosity. Something was about to happen. Something no one in that Jade store would ever forget. The door of the Jade store swung open and a sudden silence covered the room. Every whisper, every laugh, every sound seemed to stop as a tall man stepped inside wearing a black suit that looked sharp as a blade. His shoes clicked softly on the marble floor. His face was calm yet powerful and his eyes cold and deep, like the ocean on a stormy night. The air in the store seemed to change. People straightened their backs as if an invisible force had filled the room. The manager was the first to speak, his voice nervous as he said, "Good evening. Sir, welcome to Jade Palace. How can I help you?" But the man did not even glance at him. His eyes were fixed only on Lena, who stood quietly near the counter, her hands still holding her small brown bag, her eyes wide with emotion. When their eyes met, she finally felt safe again. He walked straight to her, every step slow and steady. While everyone watched in complete confusion, Lena whispered softly, "Ethan, you came." Her voice was shaky with relief. The man reached her side and gently took her hand. His touch firm and protective, he asked, "Are you all right? My love, did anyone bother you?" Lena lowered her gaze and said quietly, "I am fine, Ethan. Just a misunderstanding." The saleslady stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. She looked from Lena to the man, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The manager frowned and tried to speak again. "Sir, this woman was just leaving. We had some confusion about our products." Ethan turned his head slowly toward him, his expression unreadable, his voice calm but heavy like thunder before rain. "What kind of confusion exactly?" The manager swallowed hard and said, "Well, she was touching items without permission, and she said she wanted to buy something, but obviously she could not afford it." The man's eyes narrowed a little. He asked, "Obviously, how did you know that?" The manager stuttered, "Sir, it was clear by her appearance she looked humble, so we thought." Before he could finish, Ethan raised his hand slightly, not in anger but in warning, his voice lower now. "You thought without asking, you judged without knowing. The truth is that it was not she who could not afford your products. It is you who cannot afford your arrogance." The words hit the air like lightning. Mrs. Wong, who had been silent for a moment, stepped forward with a nervous laugh, trying to act confident. She said, "Oh, sir, we were only joking. Please do not take it seriously. The lady was pretending to be rich, maybe. You should thank us for exposing the truth." Ethan turned to her slowly. His gaze sharp and cold, he said, "And who are you to decide what truth is?" She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came out. The way he looked at her made her knees weak. The other customers stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold, their faces full of curiosity and fear. The saleslady whispered to the manager, "I think I have seen this man before. He looks familiar." The manager's eyes widened as a thought crossed his mind. He had seen that face in magazines, on business covers, on television interviews, but his mind refused to believe it could. It really be the same Ethan Lee, the famous businessman, the owner of multiple companies and luxury stores, including maybe even this one. He quickly checked his memory and felt sweat on his forehead. He realized the truth. This man was indeed Ethan Lee, the billionaire investor, and the secret owner of the Jade Palace store. He had just insulted the wife of his own boss. His hands began to tremble as he tried to speak. "Sir, please forgive us. We did not know who she was." Ethan looked around the store, his eyes cold and controlled. He said, "You should not treat people kindly because of who they are. You should treat them kindly because it is right." Lena tugged gently on his hand, whispering, "Ethan, it is all right. Let's just go." But Ethan shook his head softly. "Not yet." His eyes moved to the saleslady. He asked, "Did you laugh at my wife earlier?" Her lips quivered. "No, sir, yes, sir, but it was not meant to hurt anyone." Ethan's voice became quieter, more serious. "I heard enough from her call before I came here. You humiliated her and let others mock her in a place that belongs to me." Gasps spread across the room. "Belongs to you," the customers whispered to each other. "Someone said he owns this store. No way." Mrs. Wong's face turned pale as she realized her mistake. She clutched her diamond necklace nervously and lowered her head, pretending to look at the floor. Ethan gently placed his hand on Lena's shoulder and said, "My dear, you do not need to explain anything anymore. I know everything." The manager quickly bowed his head, sweating through his suit. "Sir, please give us another chance. We promise it will never happen again." Ethan looked at him for a long moment and then said, "The problem is not just you. It is the way you see people. If a woman comes here in plain clothes, you laugh. If a man comes here in a fancy suit, you bow. That is not respect. That is greed." Lena looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion. She whispered, "Ethan, maybe we should just leave. I already got what I wanted." He smiled gently at her and said, "Not yet, my love. They need to understand something today." He turned back to the crowd, his voice strong and clear. "My wife came here only to buy a small bracelet, a gift for her mother. Yet all she found was cruelty from people who think kindness depends on price tags. Remember this. Everyone's true worth cannot be seen in gold or jade, but in how you treat those who seem to have less." The store was silent. No one dared to move. Even the lights seemed softer, as if the whole place was ashamed of what had happened. Ethan took Lena's hand and said softly, "Let's go, my dear. You do not need to stay here any longer?" She nodded quietly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as they walked toward the door. The people parted silently, creating a path for them to leave. Just before stepping outside, Ethan paused and turned back for one last look. He said to the manager, "I will decide tomorrow what to do with this store. Make sure your staff remember today." The manager nodded quickly, bowing low. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." As the door closed behind them, the silence remained heavy. Inside, no one spoke. Everyone was left with one single question echoing in their hearts. Who was this woman that even a billionaire treated with such love and respect? The door closed behind Ethan and Lena, but the sound of his words still hung heavy. In the air inside the Jade store, everyone stood frozen. The saleslady clutched her shaking hands together. The manager wiped sweat from his forehead. Mrs. Wong stared at the door, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. The name Ethan Lee echoed in her mind again and again as she tried to remember where she had heard it before. A young man who worked as an assistant whispered to the manager, "Sir, isn't he the same Ethan Lee who owns half of Central Plaza?" The manager's face turned pale, as he nodded slowly, his lips trembling. "Yes, that's him, the one who built the Golden Sky Tower. The one whose company owns several luxury brands, even this store belongs to him." The saleslady gasped and dropped the jade tray she was holding. The sharp sound of jade pieces hitting the marble floor made everyone jump. Mrs. Wong's mouth opened slightly as she muttered, "I didn't know. I didn't know." She looked around nervously, hoping no one had recorded her mocking words from earlier, but the other customers were too shocked to even speak. Some of them whispered softly to each other in disbelief that humble woman was his wife, the one we insulted earlier. Outside the store, Ethan opened the car door for Lena, helping her step inside. She looked at him with gentle eyes and said, "Ethan, you didn't have to come, you're busy." He smiled faintly and replied, "When my wife calls me, no work is more important." They sat quietly for a moment, the city lights glowing outside the window. The world seemed peaceful inside the car, yet both of them knew the storm still waited behind them. Back inside the store, the manager was pacing in circles. "What do we do now?" he muttered. "He owns everything. If he fires us, we're finished." The saleslady nodded quickly, tears forming in her eyes. She whispered, "I didn't mean to be rude, I thought. She was just another poor woman." The manager glared at her and said, "You laughed at her in front of everyone, and now you are sorry." "Too late?" the assistant said quietly. "Maybe we should go and apologize before he decides our fate." Before the manager could reply, the glass doors opened again. Everyone turned their heads, expecting more customers. But what entered instead was fear itself. Ethan had returned. His presence filled the store again, his tall figure calm and serious. Two men in suits followed, him carrying folders and papers. The staff quickly lined up, their hearts pounding loudly in their chests. The manager stepped forward, trying to smile nervously. "Sir, welcome back." Ethan looked around the store slowly, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. He said, "I wanted to see how you treat your customers when I'm not around. Now I know the truth." The saleslady dropped her gaze, unable to meet his eyes, her voice shaking. "Sir, please forgive me. I did not recognize your wife." Ethan's voice was calm, but every word felt like steel. "You should not need to recognize anyone to be kind. You work in a place that sells beauty, yet you show no beauty in your heart." The manager bowed deeply, saying, "Sir, we promise to change. Please give us another chance." Ethan raised an eyebrow and said, "Maybe, but first you will return home today and think about what kind of people you want to be tomorrow." Then he turned toward Mrs. Wong, who still stood near the counter pretending to look at her phone. He said, "Madam, I believe you also had something to say earlier about people like my wife." Her face turned red. She stammered, "I was just joking, sir. I didn't mean any harm." Ethan nodded slowly and said, "Jokes that hurt. Others are not jokes. They are cruelty in disguise." She lowered her head and said, "I understand, sir. I am sorry." Lena watched quietly from the doorway, her heart heavy, not with anger but with sadness. She said softly, "Ethan, they already know their mistake. Maybe that is enough." Ethan turned to her and smiled gently. "If you say so, my dear, then it is enough." He faced the staff once more, his voice softer now. "I will not close this store, but remember this from now on. If anyone disrespects another person because of their clothes or looks, they will no longer work under my name." The staff nodded quickly, their faces full of shame. Lena stepped closer, holding the same jade bracelet she had chosen earlier. She handed her card to the trembling saleslady and said, "I will still buy this one. It is the one I liked from the beginning." The saleslady hesitated, but Ethan gave a small nod and she processed the payment silently. Lena took the small box and smiled, saying, "Thank you." The words sounded so simple, yet so powerful, that the entire room felt lighter. Before leaving, Ethan turned once more to the manager and said, "I will send someone tomorrow to review your service policy. Train your staff to see people with respect, not pride." The manager bowed again. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," as Ethan and Lena walked out together. Everyone inside the store watched them go. The saleslady whispered to herself, I have never seen a man look at his wife that way with so much love and respect, Mrs. Wong said quietly. I wish I had treated her better. Outside, the air was cool and gentle. The streetlights painted soft lines on the road. Lena looked up at the night sky and said, Ethan, I didn't want to embarrass anyone today. I only wanted to buy something nice for my mother. He took her hand and said, You didn't embarrass anyone, they embarrassed themselves, and today they learned a lesson. Money can buy Jade, but it cannot buy heart. She smiled quietly, holding the small box close to her chest as their car drove away. The lights of the Jade store grew smaller. Behind them inside the store, the manager gathered his staff and said, Remember this day, we will never treat another customer like that again. The sales lady nodded, wiping her tears, saying, I will never forget her face. She looked so kind and gentle, and yet everyone mocked her. The manager sighed and said, Maybe kindness is the most expensive jewel after all. Far away in the moving car, Lena leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, whispering, Thank you for coming. He smiled softly, saying, Always my love always, while behind them the Jade store glowed quietly like a lesson carved forever in stone. The next morning the sun rose gently over the city, its golden light touching the tall buildings and quiet streets. Lena woke early, her heart still, heavy from the events of the day before. She sat by the window holding the small Jade box in her hands. The memory of the laughter, the cruel words, and the shocked faces of the people at the store filled her mind, but instead of anger she felt only calmness. She whispered softly to herself, People can be cruel, but they can also change. Ethan entered the room, still wearing his work shirt, his voice warm and loving as he said, You did not sleep much, did you? Lena smiled faintly and said, I was thinking about yesterday. I cannot stop seeing their faces. The manager, the sales lady, even. That woman, Mrs. Wong, they were all so ashamed. Ethan sat beside her and took her hand in his. He said, They should be ashamed after what they did. They judged you without reason. They deserve to face consequences. Lena shook her head gently, her hair falling across her face. No, Ethan, punishment will not teach them kindness. Only understanding. Ethan looked at her quietly, his eyes full of admiration. He had seen her strength many times before, but every time she surprised him again. He said, You have such a gentle heart, my love. Sometimes I wish I could see the world the way you do. Lena smiled softly and said, I just believe everyone deserves a chance to learn, even those who hurt us. A few hours later, Ethan drove her back to the Jade store, the same one that had once been filled with cruel laughter. This time, when they walked in, every worker bowed deeply. The manager hurried forward with trembling hands, saying, Welcome, sir, welcome, madam, please forgive us for yesterday. The sales lady stood beside him, her eyes red from crying. She said softly, I am truly sorry, ma'am. I behaved terribly. Please let me keep my job. I have a family to feed. Lena looked around the store. It was quieter now, softer, almost humble. The brightness of the lights no longer felt proud but gentle. She could feel that the people had changed, at least for this moment. She said calmly, Please raise your heads. There is no need to bow to me. The sales lady hesitated but slowly looked up. Tears still in her eyes, Lena stepped closer and said, Yesterday you hurt me with your words, but today I forgive you. I do not want anyone to lose their job because of me. The manager's mouth opened in shock. You forgive us just like that? He asked, his voice shaking. Lena nodded, Yes, because I know what it feels like to be looked down upon, to be treated as if you do not belong, and I would never want anyone else to feel that way again. Ethan looked at her with quiet pride as the staff whispered among themselves, unable to believe that the woman they had insulted could be so kind. Mrs. Wong entered the store just then, holding a small paper bag. Her face looked pale and humble. Nothing like the proud woman from before. She walked straight to Lena and said in a quiet voice, I came to apologize. I should not have spoken the way I did yesterday. I was wrong. Lena looked at her and said, Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after them. Mrs. Wong nodded and slowly opened the paper bag. Inside was a small white jade pendant. She said, I bought this for your mother as an apology gift. Please accept it." Lena smiled gently, but shook her head, saying, "Your apology is enough. You do not need to give me anything." Ethan watched the scene unfold, his heart filled with admiration for the woman he loved. He had built companies and earned fortunes, but he had never seen such power as the power of forgiveness. It changed people. Without force, it turned pride into humility and anger into peace. The manager wiped his eyes and said, "Madam, you have taught us something that no training or rule could ever teach us. You showed us what real respect means." Ethan turned to him and said, "Then remember, respect is not about money or class, it is about humanity." The manager nodded deeply, saying, "Yes, sir. We will never forget this day." Lena turned to Ethan and said softly, "Let us go home, my love. I have what I came for." Ethan smiled. "Shall we visit your mother first?" She nodded happily, clutching the little jade box in her hands as they stepped outside the store. A light breeze brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the street market nearby. She felt free, lighter than she had felt in a long time. As they drove through the busy streets, Lena looked out of the window at the people walking by, some rich, some poor, all just living their lives. She thought about how easy it was for people to judge others based on what they see and how hard it was for them to see what truly mattered. She whispered under her breath, "Maybe one day they will learn." Ethan heard her and said, "They will, my love, because you showed them how." Her eyes met his, and for a moment they both smiled, the kind of smile that needed no words. It was the smile of understanding, of peace, of knowing that even in a world full of pride, kindness could still win. Later that evening, Lena and Ethan arrived at her mother's small house. The old woman opened the door with joy in her eyes. She hugged her daughter tightly, saying, "My dear, you came." Lena smiled and handed her the jade box, saying, "Happy birthday, Mama." Her mother opened it, slowly, gasping softly at the beautiful green bracelet inside. "Oh, Lena, this is too precious." Lena shook her head. "No, Mama, you are precious. The bracelet is just a gift."